24 February 2022, Russia launches a full-scale invasion of Ukraine with the stated objective, among other goals, of toppling the Ukrainian government. To achieve this, Russian forces invade Ukraine from various points across the eastern part of the country. The Russian army also advances into Ukraine from the north through Belarus, greatly reducing the distance to Kyiv. Initially, the Russian military aimed to seize control of most of the country within a few days, capturing the Ukrainian capital and decapitating its political structure. Speed was crucial, and in this strategy, the Hostomel Airport, also known as Antonov Airport, held a prominent place. It was here that the first major battle of Russia's invasion of Ukraine took place. Indeed, just hours after Russian troops entered Ukrainian soil, more than 30 Russian helicopters launched an assault on this airport with the intent to capture it. But why was Hostomel Airport so crucial to Russia's invasion plan? Located just under 20 kilometers northwest of Kyiv's city center, this airport had a 3,500-meter runway suitable for landing the largest military transport planes. It was even known as the base of the world's longest and heaviest aircraft, the Antonov An-225. Seizing this airport would enable Russian forces to quickly deploy troops to the gates of Kyiv. Additionally, it was situated on the path of Russia's invading forces advancing from the north, which in theory could reinforce the Russian assault force arriving by helicopter. Finally, the Russian military believed that the airport was poorly defended, making it an easy target for a limited force. Let's take a closer look at the Russian assault force launched against Hostomel Airport. It is estimated that it was made up of about 34 helicopters of various models. There were Mi-8 helicopters for troop transport and two types of combat helicopters, the Kamov Ka-52 Alligator and the Mi-24. The transport helicopters carried a total of 200 to 300 soldiers, members of airborne troops from the 45th Guards Spetsnaz Brigade and the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade. These were elite units. In addition to this main assault force, another group of attack helicopters of an unknown number had the mission to arrive at Hostomel before the main assault force to clear the way for the ground troop deployment. On the airport side, the Ukrainian defense was relatively weak, as anticipated by Russian forces. The Ukrainian High Command had not anticipated an attack of this scale on Hostomel, and the troops stationed there expected to face, at most, small groups of saboteurs. On the morning of 24th February, the airport was defended by around 200 soldiers from the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade under the command of Major Vitaly Rudenko. However, most of these men were conscripts who had recently started their service or administrative staff with little to no combat experience. They were equipped with AK-47s, AK-74s, helmets, and bulletproof vests. They also had a few BTR armored vehicles to move around the airport perimeter. Their anti-aircraft defenses were limited to a few 9K-38 Igla man-portable surface-to-air missile launchers and at least one Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. Despite this, they had conducted exercises in the days prior, and defensive positions were assigned to the men around the runway and barracks in case of an attack. Following bombings that had occurred early in the morning, the men were on high alert and had been deployed to these positions. Around 20 men had been sent to the north end of the runway with the Zu-23 to protect a radar, leaving them relatively isolated from the rest of the troops who were positioned further south along the runway. The Ukrainians also took precautions by rendering the runway unusable for Russian aircraft by parking various vehicles on it. Finally, they received the reinforcements, notably about 30 seasoned members of the Omega Special Forces Anti-Terrorist Detachment, who arrived around 9 a.m. in 3 armored vehicles. Other Ukrainian units were involved, but due to the confusion of the first hours of the Russian invasion, their presence and roles remain unclear. Additionally, it appears that some firefighters present at the airport also joined the fight. Now, let's go over the events of 24th February. I should mention that the confusion during the assault means that some details remain uncertain, and there are conflicting accounts about the composition and deployment of the Russian assault force. I will present the version that seems most coherent based on the information available, but a link in the description offers an alternative account. Between 6 and 7 a.m., in an attempt to destroy defensive installations and disrupt the garrison, Russian aerospace forces launched 4 3M14 caliber missiles at Hostomel Airport. 2 missiles crashed without exploding, a third struck the parade ground, and the fourth hit a residential building outside the base, apparently without causing casualties, though one can imagine the terror these strikes caused among the civilian population. Other strikes more successfully targeted 2 air defense sites tasked with monitoring the Dnieper River to the north, which had been designated as an access corridor to Hostomel for the Russian assault force. Alongside these strikes, radar jamming operations were organized over this same area to further ease the approach to Hostomel. According to accounts from Ukrainians on the ground, the first Russian helicopters reached Hostomel around 11 a.m. Almost immediately after hearing the Russian helicopters, the Ukrainians had to take cover as the Ka-52 and Mi-24 opened fire. About 80 civilians working on site sought refuge in an air raid shelter built under the Antonov company buildings. They had stayed despite the earlier missile strikes, mainly to try to protect the Antonov and Tu-25. The Ukrainian defense was relatively effective, as their troops, scattered and concealed in the surrounding vegetation, were not easy targets for the helicopters. Moreover, the defenders' limited weaponry still posed a real threat to the Russian helicopters. For instance, reports tell of a 25-year-old Ukrainian soldier, Serhiy Falatiuk, who moved onto the runway with an Igla missile launcher to try to target a Ka-52 helicopter passing overhead. As the helicopter flew past, he locked onto it, fired, and hit the Ka-52, which crashed further down the runway and exploded instantly. The battle continued amid considerable confusion, further obscured by smoke from fuel depots and infrastructure hit by Russian fire. Other Russian helicopters were damaged by Ukrainian fire, and another Ka-52, along with a Mi-24, crashed around the airport. A third Ka-52 had to make an emergency landing in a nearby field, and its crew managed to evacuate the helicopter. Eventually, the Ukrainian troops began to withdraw to the barracks south of the airport, likely due to dwindling ammunition, as they had not anticipated such an intense engagement. With the primary objective of the initial Russian attack helicopters accomplished, the clearing of the runway and its surroundings, this allowed Mi-8 helicopters to land, enabling Russian ground troops to deploy. Returning to the route taken by the main Russian assault force, composed of Mi-8 transport helicopters and their escort. This route has been traced using various videos recorded by Ukrainians who sighted the Russian helicopters, as well as a Russian propaganda video that later aimed to glorify the assault and shows the position of the assault force at different hours on 24 February. It is worth noting that the time displayed on this video corresponds to Moscow's time zone. In February, an hour must be subtracted to get the time in Ukraine. The main Russian assault force took off around 11 a.m., notably from the VD Bolshoi-Bokov Airport, located about 170 kilometers north of Hostomel in Belarus, and proceeded south, staying within Belarusian airspace as long as possible. The force crossed into Ukraine around 11:30 a.m. and followed the course of the Dnieper River, flying at low altitude to avoid detection and maintain an element of surprise for Ukrainian defenders. Ultimately, Ukrainian radars detected them only near the dam of the hydroelectric plant north of Kyiv. As the helicopters left the Dnieper River to head east toward Hostomel, the assault force split into 2 groups and came under fire from Ukrainian air defense. A first missile damaged a Ka-52 Alligator helicopter, which was forced to make an emergency landing along the riverbank. A second missile hit a Mi-24, which crashed into the Dnieper River. After this, the remaining helicopters deployed flares to evade further attacks successfully. The assault force continued on its path to Hostomel, where both groups of helicopters were sighted multiple times.
Раз, два, три, четыре, пять, шесть, семь, восемь. Раз, два, три, четыре, пять, шесть, семь, восемь, девять, 10, 11.
They finally reached Hostomel Airport around 12:20 p.m. With the runway and its surroundings cleared after the attack that began at 11 a.m., one of the two groups of Mi-8 helicopters landed, allowing Russian troops to deploy on the ground and take cover. Shortly after, the Mi-8s of the second group landed further north and began securing the perimeter before advancing toward Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian Major Vitaly Rudenko, informed of the Russian troops' deployment but lacking specifics on their exact locations, decided to head toward the runway in an armored vehicle to assess the situation. He soon came under Russian machine gun fire and realized that Russian troops were nearby. He managed to turn back and return to the barracks where the Ukrainian forces planned to resist. At this point, the Ukrainian defenders found themselves in a dire situation. They were threatened both by advancing Russian ground forces and by helicopters circling above them, while their ammunition supplies were running low. The Russian forces advanced and took control of the control tower building and the surrounding area. Ultimately, after retreating to the barracks, running out of ammunition, and facing mounting pressure, Major Rudenko ordered his men to withdraw toward the town. The airport then fell into Russian hands with their flag raised over the buildings. They also took prisoners, including the 20 Ukrainian soldiers who had been sent to protect the radar to the north of the airport, customs officers working at the airport, and likely other soldiers. The Russians allowed the civilians who had taken shelter in the air raid shelter to leave, bringing their wounded with them. The losses on both sides remain unclear to this day. On the Ukrainian side, we know that at least some civilians were killed at the airport, such as the fire chief, who was struck by helicopter fire while trying to extinguish a blaze. The Ukrainian army claims that none of its soldiers were killed during this confrontation, though this is difficult to believe given the intensity of the clashes. The Russian army claims the same, but testimonies from Ukrainian prisoners tasked with moving bodies mention at least 80 Russian soldiers killed, in addition to those aboard downed helicopters. In the early afternoon of 24 February 2022, while Russian casualties were likely high, the Russian operation at Hostomel appeared successful, as the airport was under Russian control. However, events to be covered in another video will reveal that the situation would become far more complicated.